guys, my name is Alex, but you can call me Alex because we're just that close. So, today I'm going to be talking about euthanasia and physician-assisted suicide. So I would like to preface my main claim with a little statistic from 2017 that says there are 73% of Americans were in support of euthanasia, which, to clear that up, euthanasia is assisted suicide where the physician administers the lethal dose, and 60% were in support of physician-assisted suicide, which is where the physician prescribes to the patient and they self-administer. So, I agree with both of those things, so that may take away some of the controversiality of it, but I would like to take it one step further, and I assert that assisted suicide is a human right. Now, when we talk about rights, we often think a right is like a legal right, like a matter of policy, or what should we be allowed to do, moral value, but I say that because of the simple existence of the human mind, simply by existing as self-aware beings, it is a fact that we feel desires, and we feel within ourselves the inherent desires to, for example, to live, you know? So, my main points that will be supporting that is 1, death is a human right. 2, not all reasons that people have to die are measurable or detectable. And 3, not being held hostage is also a human right. So, my first point, death is a human right. Just as we have the right to live, we have the right to die, and the right to want to die, and it is not uncommon for people to feel the desire to die. It's very common among people that feel depression, and I do not mean to suggest at all that it is the proper solution. However, it is a fact of life that we feel these things and we cannot help how we feel. And so, a term that people often throw around is, it's a permanent solution to a temporary problem, which is very true, but in some cases, and it very rarely is the solution, but in some cases, as I'm about to list my second claim, it is somewhat viable. So, to go off of that, the cases in which it might be considerable is that not all of the reasons that people have to die are measurable or detectable to those outside of the individual in question. I was talking to my dad about this the other day, and he told me a story about a friend that he had in college, and my dad played rugby, and so this guy was on his rugby team, and he got concussed many, many times, and he started hearing voices in his head, and he tried everything to get rid of them. He tried therapy, he tried every drug possible, meditation, just anything. Like, why wouldn't you try absolutely anything there is, but nothing worked. So one day he jumped off a bridge and committed suicide. And so had he been stopped, had somebody seen him and said, hey, don't do that, and pulled him down before he could jump, they would have put him in a psychiatric ward, given him heavy therapy. Maybe it would have helped, but considering that he tried everything else, probably not, and he would have continued to suffer because of it. And therefore, not all pain can be proven clinically. Mental pain is a very gray area. And so we have to consider that as people, as entities outside of that individual, that the pain that one must feel in order to have the desire and the will to die must be at least reasonably considerable. So, my last point is that not being held hostage is a human right. Just as you wouldn't want to be kept somewhere you don't want to stay, or you don't want to be forced somewhere that you don't want to go, why can't you say the same about your own body? If you really feel that desire within you, are you not being kept hostage? So what right does another individual have to say you have to stay here if that's really against your own desire? And the unfortunate truth is that someone with that will and the desire and the will to do it are likely to commit suicide, and that's the sad truth. But somebody that has that same will and are physically unable to, that right does not diminish or disappear because of that inability. So, I asserted that assisted suicide is a basic human right, and I say that under the pretenses that one, death is a human right. Not all reasons that people have for dying are detectable or measurable, and not being held hostage is a human right. So I hope I've been able to open your minds about about that assisted suicide is a human right, and that this goes beyond a matter of moral value or matter of policy, and it is in fact grounded in logic. Thank you.
Very well, Alex, you identify two subjects in your proposition, euthanasia and physician-assisted suicide, which really are distinct things as your subject. And then most of your speech is really devoted to a right to suicide as opposed to a right to either euthanasia or physician-assisted suicide. There's not really much discussion about what the necessity is of having a physician involved in these processes. The one example that you use in the body of the speech about your father's friend from college who jumped off a bridge and ended his life, that wasn't physician-assisted suicide, that wasn't euthanasia, that was self-selection, and anybody can do that anytime they so choose, and I don't know that anybody is ever prosecuted for attempting suicide. They might be committed civilly for a period of time so that they don't do harm to themselves, but it's not like they get locked in prison because they've tried to commit suicide. They attempt to help people. Your claim seems to be that attempting to help people violates their right to kill themselves, and I'm not exactly sure that that is as persuasive as you seem to believe it is. I also think that despite your protestation that we have what is largely a value claim that's being presented here, since there's not really any discussion about where human rights come from and what they are based on, it's awfully hard to make this as a claim of fact in the absence of some kind of context there. I do appreciate the analogy that you draw to, well, if life is a right, then death should be a right also. I kind of appreciate the idea that you're giving us there, but there's not really much development of that. There's one place toward the end of your third point where you suggest, for instance, there might be people who are sick who can't help themselves to suicide. And that's where that issue of physician-assisted suicide or euthanasia would probably be relevant to somebody who really feels trapped. They're unable to jump off the bridge or stand in front of the train or whatever it is that, drown themselves, however it is they're thinking about going out. In which case, then, is there a need or a right to have a doctor administer a drug to you or provide you with a drug that would allow you to end your life earlier? And that's, I think, where the controversy is supposed to be on this issue, but like I said, it's only developed a little bit in passing. Presentation issues, You know, I don't have a problem for the most part with your speaking from different sides of the lectern. That's perfectly fine, and you did seem engaged. Sometimes it looked a little bit like maybe it's pacing. It would be better probably if you stuck to one side for an issue, and then move to the other side for the next issue, then come back. So it's not like you're doing it constantly, and it feels a little bit more like it's a deliberative act on your part. It's what we call walking the transitions. You do a transition from one idea to the next idea, and you stay in the one place where you're talking about that one idea until it's time to change ideas again, and then maybe do a little bit of the walking kind of thing. Yours looked a little bit more like it was pacing rather than the deliberate kind of thing. It wasn't excessive pacing, and I like I said, I do think you do a nice job trying to speak to us and be direct about your ethos, so to speak, on this particular subject. But when it comes to evidence, the only evidence that I hear is at the very beginning some polling on this issue, but I don't get a source for that polling. And then the only other evidence that I have is this example, this personal example from your father's friend. And other than that, everything else is really hypothetical in nature, and I think that that's a little bit problematic. All right, thank you.